Ultimately, very rarely do I see a mature buck using that same exact trail. He will intersect with trails, and he'll come across them and move through them pretty often. But in terms of day in, day out, hitting that same trail and like to a T, like within the 3 yard variance on either side of a particular trail, no, he's not doing that very often. But he'll walk through that same area, that same 150-yard wide funnel. He'll walk through that same area all the time. It's just, in the setting where if you have the trail camera there and you're kind of thinking every deer has to walk down this trail in this one funnel spot, it's like, no, it's not very likely. He's 50 yards out in front of the camera walking somewhere in this direction, or he's down off behind the camera walking around it on that side. So, but in the end, not very often do they walk that same exact trail, but they walk in those same areas all the time.
It's the one thing, me and a buddy of mine that we do a lot of trail camera studies, and I've been logging my trail camera data for over 10 plus years now. And I love looking at that data. But one thing that I've learned is that, and these are bow numbers, so these are not verified when it comes to, this is just what I think. But if I get a buck in daylight, say once a week, hitting this scrape or doing something, I think he's probably there 3 or 4 times, or maybe even more, just because that he's not going through that spot. Just from personal experience hunting, I've seen it so many times where I could be sitting there and it could be the best day ever, and there's a doe that came in heat and there's bucks coming through, they're cruising. My camera could be sitting there 20 yards in front of me and not one of them walked in front of that to be able to see it. And that's where it opened my eyes and I think it burns a lot of people, not to go on a rant about like cell cameras, but I think it burns a lot of people with looking at cell cameras because they want that deer to show up before they go hunt. And I think a lot of times you're missing opportunities by, waiting on that. And that kind of sounds like, what you're saying as far as them using different trails as they're coming through maybe a particular area, or using a bedding area, but not necessarily using that same trail every day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, a lot of times, like you said, you got a picture of him moving through there once, and then now you're kind of preemptively thinking, well, he's probably coming through at least 3 to 4 times during the week. I would garner to say 6 to 10 times. And that means that not daylight though. I mean, that would include nighttime activity, but he's going to be in that area pretty heavily. Like if he walks through that area, especially from what I've seen, especially in the evening, if you're picking up a deer in the evening and he's kind of moving through that one particular area pretty consistently, or you saw him even one time and he's hitting a scrape or a rub, especially in the evening, then I would garner to say that he's going to be in that area quite frequently. Whereas in the morning time, that's where I'd said in that first video, and I'd like to make a future video on that and going even deeper into it because it's such an interesting idea, is the idea that in the morning, it's more of kind of a missional movement. It's almost as if they wake up with this preemptive mindset of, I'm going to go hit this point, this point, this point, this point, and then I'm going to bed back down. And after I do those things, then they probably already positioned themselves nearby evening type of food source where a lot of does are going to be congregated. And that doesn't mean they're going to walk into the food source. That just means that they're going to be kind of hugging around the staging areas and just lingering around where the does are at. But for the most part, that morning time frame, they're moving significantly further on a way higher frequency. Whereas in the evening, it's a lot more condensed. And those evening locations, most of the time, they're pretty similar. I don't have exact numbers on this, but I would think that there's around like 3 general evening locations that mature bucks really like to kind of hone in on. Whereas in the morning, they could just wake up and walk in any direction. And that's kind of the interesting thing that I've seen, is that it doesn't really depend on wind. There's not really a major depiction on thermals. It just, if a mature buck decides he wants to go in this direction and go and hit this scrape and rub and whatever, it doesn't matter. The variables in play don't matter to him. Like he's just going to go do it. And that was just, and I think I'd been asked a question recently by a guy that was pretty interesting. And it was, how often does a mature buck, whenever he's on that kind of missional morning time frame, wrap downwind of doe beds and stuff like that? And the quick answer to that is that they don't pretty much ever at all. And most of the time they're trying to hit those intersecting trails where does are traveling. And kind of pick up ground scent off of that. And if at any moment they pick up something that was interesting to them in terms of ground scent, that'll actually make them deter their travel route and go back and try and find that little group of does. And they won't get within 30 to 40 yards of those does, but they'll just continue to smell ground scent that entire time. And then whenever they determine she's not nestrous or whatever, then he'll turn around and jump right back on his trail and continue his travel. And it's kind of the same thing that you'll see as a hunter, where if you have a mature buck and he's walking with his nose kind of level to the ground or semi-low, and he's just moving at a decent pace, and you throw a grunt out or you rattled antlers maybe 5 minutes before or something. Well, I wouldn't say rattle antlers. A lot of times if you rattle antlers, he's going to come right into you. But if you throw a grunt or something to try to catch his attention, and he just continues to walk on by and doesn't pay attention to you, and then that whole thing where 15, 30 minutes later, he circles back and comes and checks you out. His idea is that he circled back and he's going to check you out for like 5 minutes, and then he's going to go right back to his trail where he was at and hop right back on it and continue walking that morning travel route. So same thing applies there. I think I got off on a tangent, but all interesting stuff. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And like the mornings when you're talking about them moving more, so are you talking in daylight as far as
in daylight? Now, I think in the end, if you calculated whenever the sun actually fully set, and then that whole nighttime time frame, like say the sun sets at 6 p.m. They're probably going to move all the way until 8:30 to 9 p.m. in many cases, and in the end, if you added up all the yards traveled, it would be pretty similar to the morning time. But like I said, I'm focusing heavily on daylight activity because that's really all we care about as hunters. And the morning time frame just seems to be peak movement in terms of distance traveled. They may walk the same amount of yards in terms of daylight in the end, which is really hard to calculate even with a drone, just because they wander so much in one little area, back and forth and back, and kind of wrapping little circles and hitting rubs and scrapes. But in the end, the morning time, they're traveling very, very long semi-straight lines, almost all the time. Just these really, really long direct travel routes away from an area. And then whenever they make it to their evening feeding area, they just kind of linger in that area, like a sub 200 acre little section. And then they'll bed back down, and then they'll get back up. And that's whenever at nighttime, I've only recorded this a couple times because I haven't done a ridiculous amount of nighttime research, but at nighttime, that's whenever they do another kind of long trek. Well, they're going to travel all the way across the property, maybe 800 to 1,000 acres in the end, or a mile and a half, and then bed back down. And then that's whenever they hit that morning missional movement time frame again, where they'll walk another long semi-straight line. But in the evening, almost every time it's just kind of walking circles and all over the place. It's as if a toddler just took a marker and just started scribbling, like right in this one little area, because it's just very random movement, kind of all around a type of staging area.
Yeah, and so with that movement, what's interesting, and you mentioned this, but one thing that I've always thought is that many times a buck will bed down kind of in that gray light time period and then get up and then move to their final, kind of destination spot. And that I've seen so much movement between like 8 and 9 in the morning, not at first light. I've actually never killed a deer at first light, but like my biggest deer I shot on opening day, it was like 9:30 in the morning that he was coming down through this spot. And thinking about that, I've always just thought, they bedded down a little bit and then and got up and then, finished their movement patterns. Did you see that at all in the data, or am I wrong?
Yeah, I would say that in terms of morning and them you're not shooting one at first light, that scenario for you, why it's happening, just what I think is that deer's probably bedded away quite a bit further than you think he is. Because most of the times whenever I start recording one moving in the morning, it's before light. I generally show up at say light's going to be full up at 6:30 a.m. I'll show up at 5:45 to 6 a.m. and I'll start hitting hot spots and locating them. I won't be able to ID who they are yet because I don't bring my spotlight with me for tracking deer. I think it disturbs them just enough that I don't like it. And but anyways, so I'll drop pins though on hot spots where I think mature bucks are going to be. And then as soon as light starts to come up, I'll go back and I'll re-identify those locations. And whenever I find the mature buck that I'm wanting to track that day, then I'll just continue to track him throughout time. But most cases, they're up I mean, right at, if not a little bit before, kind of that first light situation. So yeah, in your scenario, I would garner to say that in most cases that deer, he's probably bedded quite a bit further away than you think he is, and he's already been. And even if he wasn't bedded further away than you think he is, I would say that he's been up for longer than you think he is. He may have got up in his bed and he just kind of started walking circles and cleaning himself, and he goes and cleans another deer, which happens a ton, by the ways, of just bucks grooming themselves all the way throughout season, even in the rut, which is really fascinating. But I've seen a 2-year-old buck groom a 6-year-old buck one time in like peak rut, and it's like, why is this happening? It was a really cool video to take. But anyways, yeah, most of the time in that situation, he could also be in his bed, just browsing around and cleaning himself and kind of getting ready for the day per se. And then he'll hit the trail and start moving out. And maybe for you by that time frame, it's 8 a.m. for where you're located, kind of intersecting him. Yeah.
That's all. That's all dependent, and like it's all dependent on where you're hunting at too. So like you said, depending on where you're at along that travel pattern. But you mentioned something about very directional travel for them. Like, so they've got that evening spot in mind that they're going to, and they're going to get there. Do they change you? And you'd also mentioned that it doesn't seem to change a whole lot depending on the wind or anything else. So they're like almost like beelining it, and just terrain's kind of dictating how they have to move through. Yeah, no,
I'd seen a few times where they walked with the wind in their face, a few times where they walked with it kind of tailwind, and then quite a lot where they walk with it kind of in their sides. And but in the end, over the course of one full travel route, it's in their sides, it's in their face, and then sometimes it just depends on terrain a lot of the times, because they can't walk a straight line from point A to point B, so they're having to walk with the terrain, and they're not getting that full headwind the entire time if that's what they want. And from what I've seen, it just doesn't. I don't know. I don't have enough data to suggest that it doesn't, but I don't think that the whole headwind idea or crosswind or tailwind. I think it matters more just where that deer decides he wants to be based off of where he's already located.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with your buddies. Leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe. If you want to check out more content like this, there's plenty in the links below. We truly appreciate having you guys along with us.